Hey Jay, it's 5 after. You can go ahead and get started if you want.
Okay, this is just for everybody listening. We've got a meeting on the 16th of May, which is our next NEKBA meeting, and I'm just trying to remind everybody that we've got a silent auction for Fun Day. So please bring me your fun and bee related items, and we will get those cataloged and put out for Fun Day. If for some reason you forget, we can still accept them on Fun Day as well, but it would be best to bring them to me next meeting. So, and that money goes to our scholarship people. So it is being used well.
How's my sound now?
Better. Yep.
Okay, good. So, welcome everybody. This is our monthly Q&A meeting. We're still doing these by Zoom. We'll probably always do these by Zoom. Whereas our regular monthly meeting is in person in Lawrence at the old stomping grounds and fairgrounds where we've been for a good number of years. So this was a swarm that I caught recently, and Jim Putnam had sent the last question here. We'll see if we can get to it, how we got this down. Our weather for the month of May, the temperature outlook looks like pretty much the same as it's been all spring. We've been on the edge of above average. So that means it could be cold and hot on and off. We're not going to be in that purple zone though, so that's good. Mexico's got way too many fires or had too many already. Just FYI, this is the almanac from the Weather Channel for April 30th for my area. We got 3 3/4 inches of rain for the month of April. Our normal is 3.89, so that's fairly close. In March, we actually got 7 inches and 0.34 tenths, where our normal average is 2. So we got more than 3 times normal average, just to keep everybody in the loop. We're not in a drought here. Our officers, a few of these are on today and are making up the panel. Ed Darlington, our president, Matt Brandis is our program chair, Cecil Sweeney is our librarian, Chad Gilliland is in charge of honey plants, Janet Campbell, secretary, I'm the treasurer, Jolie Weiner is our scholarship chair for the youth, Andy Nowacek is our scholarship chair for the military veteran, we call him our liaison. Cheryl Burkhead's our editor. I believe she's on. Becky's on. Jay is on. So if anybody wants to contribute also as part of being Zoom, you can just jump in. Feel free to. Want to advertise our Fun Day coming up in a month. This is our last big educational opportunity for the year, except for the monthly meetings and of course the session that we're doing, the Q&A. But this is something you don't want to miss. If you get a chance, try to attend June 4th, the first Saturday of the month. So our first question came from Linda Orick. Linda, are you on this evening? Just say hi if you are so far. Her question a couple days ago was, I opened up the top brood box of my hive and almost all the frames were filled with capped brood, some pollen up in the corners. On the bottom of one of the frames, I saw 3 cells, queen cells, that were open, and I saw larvae inside them. I did not look into my bottom brood box, but I had heard on a podcast about bees that during the nectar flow right about now to put a honey super on, and it would give them more room also. So I did that yesterday. What do you think? I think probably that was the right thing to do, although that may not stop the hive from swarming, but Becky, what do you think?
I think all swarm questions should go to Cheryl. That's just what I think right off the top. She should just get them all because I think that's what we're going to talk about tonight.
On me all the time.
Just a heads up. Yeah.
What she said is exactly right. It's what people tell you. And what do you think? Oh, it might work. I don't know. They are
not gonna keep them at home, but we're gonna get rainy weather and it'll give them more room.
Yeah.
If they're
And-
gonna go, they're gonna go. You had larvae inside your queen cells, so those are swarm cells.
And they really are kind of swarmy this year. Our weather has just been so awful.
And late, we're behind.
You could cut them out before they're capped, but if the colony's showing indications that it wants to do that, it's just probably going to make them right back.
And you can cut them out again and be diligent about it, and you may keep them home.
They might, or they might do the bell-shaped curve like I had a colony do when I battled it forever.
Yeah. So,
Isn't
But you
that a
did-
perfect situation for a split though? I mean, you've caught them right at the exact time you want.
You could,
mhm.
but I mean, if you're going to get a honey crop off of them, I don't know, my math's not the best this evening, but you'd probably want at least 7 frames of cap brood in there about now.
We're still pretty early. I think that with our weather that we're probably going to have maybe not an early nectar flow. So that would be in your favor. It's certainly better to keep them home. When we split hives to try to prevent swarming, we find it better to move that split. You can't leave it in the same yard and think that they're going to be okay, because then they're probably already searching for that new location. And if you leave them sit there, some of those dancers are still out there looking, and they're going to come back and try to convince people to swarm. And so your your split may swarm. So it's, yeah.
Yeah, it's tricky this time of year, and things are definitely late.
Yeah.
And it's one thing, whoever can figure out how to control swarming could be a millionaire easily, but nobody's done it yet.
Or to keep them from swarming multiple times. My
Mhm.
biggest problem, if I don't know what colony they swarmed from, they will put out after swarms.
That too. I think she did the right thing, at least giving them more room.
Yep.
Some years, we super a little earlier, but this year could be just on time. So our next question comes from Veronica Sellers, and she sent this in today. She says, I have 2 questions. Here's question 1. We cleaned out our hives, and from one removed drone comb. From one hive, we removed drone comb between the 2 deeps. We froze the comb and drone larvae. Can we put it back into the box as is for the bees to reuse the wax, or should we clean out the dead drones first? I don't do drone removal. I just let it go. Is there anybody that does drone removal that can give some details?
I just want to clarify. Let's see. So we cleaned out the hives and we removed drone comb from between the 2 deep
The 2
boxes.
boxes.
So
Right.
we're just talking about like on a top bar kind of situation where maybe you pulled the drone comb open.
Yeah, it broke when we pulled them apart. We were like doing a whole box
Sure.
inspection and cleaning the bottom board and all that. So we broke a lot of it and we just cleaned it. And then we probably cleaned more than we needed to, than we broke, but we just did it. And then we have a bunch of it, and it's got drones of all stages, and we froze it. But
Yeah.
I don't really want to go through it and clean it because it's kind of gross.
Yeah.
I also
Well-
don't want to throw the wax away.
Those are your 2 choices, because the bees will do nothing with it. It is not of any use to the bees anymore.
Oh,
And so you can, put it in like a solar wax melter, which is pretty easy to make. Piece of glass in a box, and you can do that. And then like just put it on a strainer, and the
yeah.
icky stuff will stay in the strainer and the wax will fall through the bottom. You can't, the bees will not make use of that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But good thought.
And you know, that situation sounds completely normal. However, some manufacturers have noticed that the boxes aren't cut exactly to the correct dimensions. And so there's too much space that probably violates the bee space, which is 3/8 of an inch. And they have maybe an opportunity to build more wax in between the frames from the bottom brood box to
Yeah,
the
I
top.
think we might have that situation because it's more than that. It's more than 3/8 of an inch, I bet.
Yeah, that's a defect.
Okay.
Your box isn't the correct size, and so that's causing a problem because that gives the bees, they're going to build wax if they have too much space.
Yeah,
And
okay.
girl bees want to have boy bees around this time of year, and so that's what they're doing. Great. And so let's see. Next question I had. The same hive as above had loads of drones and was very full of bees, and that's normal for this time of year. We split it, but there were still lots of bees. Time we checked, so we put, I guess there were still lots of bees at the time we checked, so we put supers on to give them more room. There's still a good number of bees hanging out in the entrance each evening, like they're still crowded. We're worried that they might swarm. Before I pass this on, have you removed your entrance reducer?
Yes.
Okay. And then the question is, should we try to split them again, or are we worrying too much? So have you split them already this year?
Yes. But there were so many bees in that box, we probably could have split it three ways.
Thank you, Cheryl, for being here. I think this sounds like a question for you.
How many frames of brood you got in there? Did you hear my question?
No, sorry. Can you
How
repeat?
many frames of brood do you have in that colony?
Well, the last time we checked, we didn't go into the bottom box. So probably like 4 in the top.
Yeah, I mean, you need to inspect the entire box and see how much brood frames you're dealing with. I mean, I made splits early in the season and I've split from colonies again because they just filled those right back up and then the queen didn't have a place to lay.
Okay.
So
We'll go in and check. I mean, we inspected the bottom box once and then that's when we split it. And then, but it keeps looking congested from, yeah, we didn't take the top box off again. So we'll do that.
on your frames on the top box, did you see any queen cups?
No?
No.
Okay. Usually when they start getting really crowded, I start seeing queen cups, which they don't have any larvae or any eggs or anything in them. They just make queen cups kind of in preparation, but
Okay.
they'll
Well,
make lots of drones. That's normal.
would we see, let me just ask, would we see queen cups between the top and bottom, or could they be on the bottom box too?
Well, I run slatted racks, so I
You
can
do too?
have queen cups down below. They make really good swarm cells in the bottom box. So I would
Okay, we'll
encourage
check both. Okay,
probably tomorrow's going to be a good day
okay.
or Friday.
Between
If you
them.
want more bees, you can try and split them, or you can try to catch the swarm if you're there.
You know, that is really the question, what Robert just said. Do you really want a honey crop this year, or do you really want more hives?
Mhm.
Because if they're really full and you are wanting more hives, then you can choose to do that. But if I'm remembering correctly, are you guys first year beekeepers or
This is
second?
our second year, so we didn't get honey last year, and we really, yeah, we would like to get honey this year.
Yeah, then I would just monitor them and maybe super them here before too long to
Yeah,
give
no,
them a little bit more room.
we did, we put both supers on.
That's
Okay.
fine.
Is it drawn comb, or is it just foundation on the supers?
It's just foundation.
Yeah, and foundation doesn't relate as added space to bees.
Hmm.
Once you finally get a drawn honey super, you'll really see what a difference that makes as far as space.
Okay.
But
You'll get there. The best time of the year for getting those supers into drawn comb is coming up here shortly. So
Okay. Thanks.
Great, thank you. So next one. So this came from James Cormode. He said, I've got 2 questions he'd like to hear discussed this evening. And this has to do with, first one, what types of farm crop sprays are most dangerous and disruptive to bee colonies? That's to say, are only insecticides dangerous, or are also fungicides and herbicides? Beekeepers in Atchison County who have registered with the Drift Watch program have received letters from the county's noxious weed agent offering to place do not spray signs around our bee yards. However, that office mostly is using herbicides, and see attached. So he got a nice letter. It says from the office of Atchison County Road and Bridge, saying that they are getting that letter because they're on the Drift Watch, and they've enclosed memorandum of record and comply request signage, and asking to have that returned within 2 weeks. So, and that signage kind of looks like this. So that's the memo. I've got bees on a field, and I've never been contacted by Drift Watch, so I don't know. I haven't had any experience with this. Does anybody else? I know from, yeah.
Oh, I was just going to say, to speak to the problem with herbicides, back in the day, we pretty much said, no, it's a herbicide, it won't hurt your bees. Dr. Zachary Hung, and I think he's at Michigan University, maybe that part of the world, did research on the effects of like herbicides on our bees. And it seldom is a direct kill. Your workers get sprayed, they may die, probably not, but it won't do them any good. What it really is harmful is with our drones. And for some reason, the herbicide, if they are out and getting sprayed, it really affects their sperm and the sperm viability. And so if you are raising queens and they have that exposure, that can be quite detrimental. And so therefore, you know, they essentially, to kind of be crude and use the vernacular, they'll be shooting blanks. So if your queen is mated by these inadequate drones, she will think that she's well mated, and she won't be. She will have a very low sperm count in her spermatheca. And so it kind of is a trickle down. No, the herbicide in and of itself may not really damage your colony, but there are a lot of side effects. The other one is, when they've used herbicides, is in the loss of forage. And that's a huge problem for us all. All those little bitty flowers that used to be food for our bees are no longer there because of Roundup and the things that they're using. That's okay. That's all I know. That's everything.
Becky, and sometimes because the cost of spraying a crop, they don't just spray insecticide or fungicide.
Mm-hmm.
They do a cocktail. And
Tank
lots
mix,
of times
yeah.
the cocktail of both the insecticide, fungicide together is more toxic than either one sprayed
Yep.
singly. And then, you know, it's are your bees out working that particular area at the time that the insecticide is applied? I got concerned last year because our season was so late that the farmers planted soybeans in a time that was a dearth for our bees. And so I had bees working soybeans, which they don't typically work. And I was concerned that they were still going to be out on the soybeans, and they don't typically spray them unless they think they're going to get a decent crop. And so luckily it looked like we were kind of on the tail end of working some soybeans by the time they got out and got their aerial sprayers going. But I was really sweating that because they were going to do a cocktail of both insecticide, fungicide. But, and then there's also the neonicotinoid dusts that we see when they're planting, particularly corn, especially for younger colonies.
That's a great point, Cheryl. years ago, I know in California, they were talking about all the bees that had been killed by accident when they had combined those chemicals, the insecticides, well, they weren't using those, but it's the fungicides and the herbicides. They had some pretty big bee kills, and it took them by surprise.
Well, and Bruce and Susan have an alfalfa, the farmer plants it to alfalfa in the back, but he plants it kind of late, and they have all these dandelions back there. They just have a whole sea of dandelions back there, and you know their bees are out there on them when the farmer's coming through with glyphosate in preparation for planting, and that can't be good on them getting sprayed.
Yeah, great point. Okay.
And they don't move their colonies because it's right in the backyard, and you know how often alfalfa gets sprayed.
So it looks like that letter was dated April 22nd. So that's 8 days plus 2 days, 10 days. He's only got a few more days to send that in if he hasn't done it already. But that's what's going on in Atchison. I've never seen or heard of anybody else getting this kind of a request before. So this is the second part from James. He says, I'm also looking for advice about how to contain my bees when spraying is being done in the soybean field. He's got a soybean field next to his hives. Last year he purchased screen doors from Golden Prairie in Manhattan, and they work fairly well, but all my hives have vent slots cut into the telescoping top cover. Those slots align with the slots on the inner cover, so it makes a passage for the bees when they think they are trapped, so they can get out through the top. That's what he's trying to say, I believe. So during a recent herbicide spraying, many bees came out of those channels, but they couldn't find their way back into the hive. And so he sent a couple pictures in. This was one hive. And that's a couple more.
Holy moly.
So this hive, he says it's his northwest hive. And that photo shows bees at the upper entrance. So that's where they're coming out at the top. But there's a whole lot that are being blocked there at the bottom. And then these are what he calls the barn hives. And this photo shows how serious the problem can be with fairly large populations. Looks like they can't get back in, or they're not finding their way back in. So I haven't used those. Are those the screens that are used for robbing prevention?
Yeah.
They can be opened up and the bees can find their way back in, but it doesn't look like it's stopping them from getting out. And it's probably because of the notches in the inner cover at the lid.
Or those that are returning and can't get back in, probably, Robert.
Yeah. Almost looks like they're trying to swarm. And Jim, if you're on, you can, you know, if you're able to, you're welcome to.
I shut the bees up after dark when they were all in. Then I put the screen doors on, and everybody was in. That's when I put the screen doors on. And by the next afternoon, this is the situation that I had. By then the spray was dry and I was ready to let them out, but a lot of them had obviously come out those top spots. I've had that happen before when I've closed them up, and I'm trying to figure out how to close up the top slots temporarily when I'm doing this. Otherwise, I think they would stay in, because with the bungee cords, it holds the screen doors in and that closes them up pretty good.
Yeah, depending on the outside temperatures, there's a good chance they could suffocate or overheat. There are some screens. I don't know who sells them, but you can put them on the top and then you can try to lock all the bees in.
Oh, that would be interesting. I'd like to see those screens, because I'd hate the idea of taping up the vent holes and stopping the airflow.
Right.
Just
more important.
Just tape up that one little hole where they got the slot in that inner cover.
Yeah, that would block them in, but if it's a very hot day, if you had screens that you could just place over the top to take off your inner cover, that would provide them at least with ventilation.
Susan Lane has added in the chat box, we use wet sheets when we are having a spray event close to our hives. And I think that's probably about as good as you can do sometimes if you don't want to move them. Wet down a sheet, put it over the whole hive. If your sprayer will work with you and do it, late in the evening, first thing in the morning, both of those would be great strategies, but getting people to do that is sometimes pretty tricky.
It depends on whether they're flying or they're being applied by somebody driving a tractor and that kind of spray on.
Yeah.
We know they're going to fly, we do use wet sheets.
Do you have much forewarning though, when you have a spray? facility that's
Oh, yes, we do. There's two aerial spraying companies, and both of those owners are living within a mile of our house and our bee yard. They're our neighbors, in other words. And
Yeah.
I give them free honey and they give me free warning when they're going to spray.
That's great that they give you some forewarning, because for most people, they don't get any forewarning. When they're out doing everybody's spraying that day. So what happens is you end up having them closed up for part of the day, way too long when it's hot. And then you cook your bees.
What I don't get good warning on is some of the farmer applicators who are licensed to do it, and some of them don't realize what they're doing.
Uh-huh.
The companies that are hiring somebody, they're pretty good. Even the co-op is good about telling us when they're going to do something.
Well, Brenda added, she says that we had to spray our alfalfa field last year. We screened the hive entrances the night before, then we used wet sheets the day of the spray. Brandis posted a link from Man Lake where you can look into the 10 frame screened inner cover. So that's an option.
That sounds good.
And Susan Lane said, if it's hot, be sure to let them out as soon as possible after the spray has dried, or you will have a box full of dead bees. Sounds like the voice of experience.
Yeah, I can understand that. I've been quick to let them out when they have sprayed in the summer, when it gets to be August.
Right. Okay, well, hope that helps. And then next question.
It didn't say anything about fungus.
Came from Jacqueline Griffin, and she wrote, this weekend when doing our inspections, we noticed in one of our strongest hives that there was only drone brood and seemed to be more drones than in the other hives. No worker brood at all. We believe our queen is 2 years old unless she's been replaced, and we didn't realize it. This hive was purchased in 2020. We looked for her yesterday but didn't find her, nor did we find her on the last inspection. No queen cells noted on this inspection, but we did see a couple about 3 weeks ago. The hive is very strong though, tons of bees, and still lots of workers, very active. Who would like to comment on this? She's asking, should we requeen or should we wait? Do you think this queen's just getting old? We don't want to react too quickly, but also don't want to wait too long. So she says she'll be on the call tonight. If you need more information, she'll be happy to provide it. So, if do you have any workers in there at all, or you're just seeing some drones?
No, there's lots of workers in there, but no worker brood at all. Only drone brood and lots of it.
Okay.
You gotta lay like
Probably 3 frames of it.
No, you didn't see eggs and cells at all?
No,
No multiple eggs and cells?
no. And
No
we
eggs and
specifically
cells.
look for multiple eggs. Yeah.
Could be a failed queen.
Yeah.
Sounds odd. Yeah, she'd be old, too old.
Okay. So just replace it.
Yes, definitely. If you can find her, I'll tell you one thing. Been in many hives this week, and I have not had very good luck finding any queens. And I'm usually pretty good. So
Well, she's been really hard to find, which also makes me wonder if she's failing. It's like she's smaller and harder to find.
You need a good old young swarm queen to go march through there.
So you don't, you said no eggs, so you're not even seeing eggs
No.
in drone cells.
We didn't see any eggs. There was so much drone brood though.
Okay.
Now, mind you, it was toward the end of the day, so lighting was,
Sure, sure.
so we might have missed eggs.
Well, and that would be important, because if you don't have any eggs at all, she may have already died. And then you just need to replace her. If this is a hive with lots and lots and lots of bees, you'd probably be better off to try to introduce your new queen into like 2 frames of bees and then do a combine, because it's sometimes tricky to introduce a queen into a large hive.
Okay.
What about, since all she's got is drone brood, what about if she's got another hive with like a frame of brood or a worker brood that she could put that queen with?
Well, that would be a good idea to stave off laying workers. That certainly the brood would help with that, but and you could try to let them raise their own queen, but I'm not a fan of that. So
Too
that's
much downtime.
lots of downtime.
That's probably why you wouldn't want to introduce any open or eggs or larvae into that equation, because they may just choose to make their own.
So if we got back in there and we saw eggs and we saw that multiple eggs in one, you know, like we have a laying worker,
Yeah.
then what do we do?
What was the question, Jackie?
If we had more than one egg in one cell and
Uh-huh.
we know we have a laying worker,
Uh-huh.
then what should we do?
Well, it's never a laying worker, it's laying workers, and you will have lots and lots and lots of them. So that's part of the reason it's so hard to combat. You won't like my answer. Somebody else should answer. This is as far as we're concerned, but we have many hives, and so we feel differently about it than the person that has 2. So we take them out and we dump them, and I reclaim the foundation, and I put a nuke in there or something else in there that's queen right, and let them clean it up. And I do not deal with trying to rehabilitate laying worker bees because they just don't want to. The only way I've seen that really is successful with that is people add frames of brood to a hive for about 6 weeks, because then they have to age out the laying workers. Then how long does a bee live? Bee lives 6 weeks. So you want to, you keep adding brood that long. And so if you think about the cost of your brood at a conservative $20 a frame, you could have put a nice nuke in there or something else. You really could have done something that would be very successful. And so that somebody else needs to answer that question. That's not a good answer.
well, yeah, if
Agree
you
with
find a
Becky.
swarm cell, a sealed swarm queen cell in another colony, you could put that frame in there just to give them a new queen to replace that, unless you buy one.
The only successes I've had is to requeen as soon as possible.
Right.
And if, when you get to the situation where you actually have laying workers, it's too late. You're already done.
Don't
And
get that
so
far.
I would start over and move on. But to
So
prevent
it's-
that,
Hurry, Jackie, hurry.
No, we were planning on buying queens this week, so because we have a couple other queens. So
You usually have about 4 weeks, but by the time the queen disappears until you start having laying workers, it's about 4 weeks. So you might have some time if you're not seeing eggs right now, but it won't be long.
okay,
I had a swarm colony last year. Of course, it was just a 5 frame because I put them in a nuke. It wasn't large. And their virgin queen never got out and got mated and came back. So by the time I finally checked on them, I had multiple eggs in cells all over the place. So essentially laying workers. And I ended up putting another queen right nuke on that same spot and took the laying worker colony out in the front yard and shook them out. And all the foragers, they went back home to that queen right colony. And it seemed to straighten it up. And I didn't, you probably lost some of the, maybe the laying workers in the front yard that didn't fly home. I don't know, but then I, repurposed that wax that they'd drawn.
We have never had laying workers develop while there was still brood in the hive.
Right.
So that brood pheromone is suppressing that laying worker syndrome. So if you still have capped drone brood, you still have time. And it's usually about a week after all the brood is hatched that you may start seeing that. So Robert's 4 weeks kind of scenario is about what we've seen as well. So if you've still got some capped brood, you've still got some time to play with it.
Okay, great. Good. Thank you, guys. We were really stumped. So thanks a lot.
Well, we don't guarantee these answers.
No, no, too. It's all, you never know what you're going to get. So it's okay.
Jackie, this is Veronica. I have a question about Jackie's situation. If she's got the drone brood, that can't be from the laying workers then?
The brood that laying workers produce is just drone brood, but they never do single cells. And so you would be seeing eggs everywhere. And when you look down into the cells, you will see 3 or 4 larvas in each cell when they're doing that. So I would guess that her correctly developing drone brood is from her failing queen.
Okay, thanks.
So Matt Brandis in the comment section said he's had a hard time finding queens this past week too, so I'm not alone. Brian Pendleton, welcome Brian. He's the editor from the Midwestern Beekeepers on Missouri side. His question is, would anyone suggest pulling some of the drone brood frames and freezing them for mite control?
Doesn't hurt.
Yeah, well, if you don't
You
have
haven't
a whole
lost
lot of
anything.
mites,
Yeah.
it's just more work. If you don't have a whole lot of mites, you did a good job treating. You probably don't need to, but that's more work than I would want to do.
You could uncap them.
She got the little owie on my finger.
Oh.
And then Dwayne suggested adding a frame of eggs and larvae from another hive, and that might buy you some time. The larvae help suppress the laying workers, and that's the pheromone that Becky was mentioning. So, good
Thanks,
suggestion.
that's very, very helpful. Is that better?
So this came from Dawn North, and she wrote, so far all is good here at Norse Beekeeping 101. I have a lot of eggs, larvae, and sealed brood. Also honey in the corners. My queens were released April 18th and 19th. I have inspected them twice since that time, and I've been taking quite a few photos of the frames as I inspect them. The eggs, larvae are much easier to see when I can zoom in on the photos. And her question is, number 1, when I examine the frames, do I leave the bees as they are? I think I should. She's also adding, I don't really want to interrupt them, but it's hard to get a full picture of how things are going from the things I've read and watched on video. I thought I'd be able to count the number of eggs, larvae, sealed brood on each frame, but that's almost impossible, so I'm just going with approximations. Your input would be appreciated. I'll just say I number my frames, and that way I put them back in the same order that I've taken them out. And so that's, to me, leaving the bees kind of as they are, but at least I'm doing some inspections. What does everybody else do?
Mostly just make sure the brood's together. If, if it doesn't have brood on it, then I'm not too concerned about where it goes. The little devil horns came out, and I really want you to count how many eggs and larvas you have, but that's so mean. No, I don't, you don't do that at all. You know what? You're doing great. You've done good inspections. You're conscientious. I think you're doing just everything you're probably supposed to do and then some. So keep on keeping on, and just kind of, you want to keep track of that in a general way, so that if you go in next week and you said, now wait, I wrote down last week that I had 4 frames of capped brood or 4 frames of total brood, and this week I still only have 4 frames. What's going on here? And then, you can do some comparisons. So good job. You're doing everything right.
There's a way to measure those kind of things using the grid type. And I think I've seen it described. You divide it in 6 on the frame, and you take a general survey count of what's in the first 6, the second 6, and the third 6, fourth, fifth, and 6th, so forth. If you're taking notes and you're doing something like that, if you're trying to differentiate between brood and eggs and stored foods, trying to count the number of bees. I'll see if I find a link for that. I will email that back to you. But there's something out there. And then we have her question number 2. On my first inspection, she noticed she had some extra comb built in between the frames, extending upward through the top. I think it's called drone comb or ladder. Not sure. She realized she had more space between those 2 frames, and she's heard some of us say that she should leave it there. That's what she has done. And does that sound okay, or should she remove it? Ed Darlington, what would you say?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear the question.
She knows she had extra comb built in between some of her frames. She thinks it was they were putting drone comb in between. She wasn't sure. She realized she left more space between those frames. And she heard some of us say that she should leave it there. And that's what she did. But now she wants to make sure it's okay and wants to know if she should remove it. Comb between the frames.
I've always trying to get rid of the comb in between. It's just always been a mess, and of course there I try to make sure I maintain the right bee space. And the only time I've really had problems is when I put a inner cover in upside down or something like that, and then I'll wind up getting a burr comb in between, and I found it best just to clean it out.
And that's a very good mention of the subject of bee space. Too much space, they'll put in wax. Too little space, they propolize. And so if you do any research that, Google bee space. For instance, the inner covers, some of them are equal on both sides, and there's not a deep side and there's not a shallow side. And some, depending on the manufacturer, have a shallow side and a deep side. And we try to teach it, make sure that you flip those, depends on the season. The deep side goes down for the cold and winter season, and the shallow side goes down for the spring and summer season, because the bees will take advantage of the violation of the bee space and build wax where you don't want them to. Same situation we came upon earlier tonight, where there's too much space between the brood boxes because they're not cut to the correct dimensions, and the bees are building a lot of wax in between. It's a defect, and it shouldn't happen that way, because every time you do an inspection, you're going to run into problems where you're tearing into all that stuff. And right now they're putting drone brood in it, and it just makes it messy.
Yeah, I agree with you, Robert. I mean, I would clean that comb up, because like you said, the longer if you leave it in there, they're just going to keep building. And every time you pull out a frame, you're just going to be ripping stuff open, and it makes it harder to pull frames out because now you've kind of taken away a little bit of your edge space. So clean it out.
Yeah, you get a lot more uniformity keeping all the frames tightly together because that's the correct bee space. And if you have too much space, you lose that and run into problems like Matt is mentioning. That's what I'd recommend too. Are you on, Don? Hopefully that helped answer your question. So Pat Wakeman wrote on the subject of pesticide, he's wondering if my hive of shaking then dying bees is a result of a virus or pesticide poison. It's a new package. This was installed on March 27th. The queens laid several frames of brood. He did a sugar roll 2 weeks with 0 mites. The dying and shaking has occurred in the last 2 to 3 weeks. They were started out on dead out frames, a colony from a previous season, and that's possibly a factor. Is it too early for pesticides? And are there any viruses around? Thanks.
Pat, I wanted to ask you, was there quite a bit of stored pollen in these frames that you're reusing?
Yes, there was. I put in several frames of stored pollen.
Did they, other than the shaking, what did they look like? Did they look normal other than the shaking, or were they discolored in any way, shiny?
Looked normal. Looked like they were constantly on the entryway, just kind of cleaning themselves, and then hundreds of dead bees out on the ground, and they would just kind of shake a little bit and vibrate their wings, and yeah.
Was this stored with wax moth protection previously?
You know, yeah, there were several boxes. It may have had some paradichlorobenzene. That's one of my thoughts there on using dead out frames. So, but it's been dried out, or it has off gassed since last fall. So yeah, nothing recent.
And paradichlorobenzene is the correct chemical in the wax moth protection that you'd want to be using.
Right.
It does require, some airing of the combs out. But generally speaking, we had this discussion last month and the previous month before too. So that those combs weren't empty; they had a lot of pollen in them, and perhaps the directions, as I recall, on the wax moth protection, we're talking about empty combs, not combs with any food source in them. So it might be quite possible that perhaps the pollen in those combs may be contaminated.
Right.
And that might be causing a problem.
Yeah. Yeah, that's my only other thought. It seems too early for many pesticides since fields have just
really been planted yet.
Yeah, just been planted, and other than fungicides or something else, I don't.
Yeah,
and herbicides.
And especially since it's lasting for several weeks.
Right. I'll just keep monitoring.
Yeah, if you decide to,
Pat, you might consider removing the stuff that's got any pollen in it and changing that out and seeing if you can make a difference. I would hate for you just to kind of go, oh, well, whatever. I think that might make a difference. And if you can pull that out, I think I would.
Okay. it seems like this last month they brought in a lot of pollen and.
Oh, yeah.
and
Oh,
it-
yeah.
It's probably mixed up, but maybe I can locate those outer ones or something that would have that old pollen.
Yeah, such
Yeah,
an odd
that's-
year. I mean,
Thank
the
you.
apple trees were just blooming, unless it's a herbicide on the dandelions or something, which the dandelions are done. But apple blossoms are still in bloom. And normally that's the middle of April, but everything's been late this year. And I personally don't know of much spraying that's gone on. There's nothing in the fields. No corn that I know of has been planted, although I'm starting to see some tilling. So I can't imagine what it is. And where do you live? What area?
Tonganoxie.
Okay.
And there's been corn planted, they're actually starting to plant soybeans now too, so.
Interesting, but none of the leaves are out. Nothing's sprouted. I'm sure. I haven't seen any. The only thing I've seen is wheat.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
Thank you.
you're welcome to let us know what happens next month.
Okay.
If you shake the bees out and start them on
What
something
Judy
else.
Wu used to say with neonic dust if they're planting.
Yeah, but he said this has been going on for 2 to 3 weeks, and that would mean,
I mean, they've been planting the
early
fields
April.
out where we are.
Yeah. Okay. Well, those were the last questions I got. Just Susan.
Hey,
Moore
Robert,
made a
do you know,
comment. Yeah.
out of curiosity, or anybody else know, is the Beltsville lab accepting bees again for analysis?
I'm not
I
sure.
know
Does anybody else?
pre-COVID, you could send bees in for an analysis, and I know that kind of got shut down with COVID. I didn't know if they started that back up or not.
This is Jack Griffin. We've sent some of Mo Hive's bees and wax to Mizzou, and they will do an analysis there.
In Mizzou?
Yeah,
In Columbia?
yes, sir.
You have to be.
Really?
No, we have to pay them, but I think it was like $100 both times we did it. It wasn't very much. Now it could be
You
because
know,
we're not profit. But
Yeah, it'd be interesting, Pat, if you could find either Mizzou or the USDAR's lab in Beltsville, if they would accept a bee sample and do an analysis. That's because that's very interesting, the whole shaking on the ground kind of a thing.
Yeah, we have viruses, but that's related more to the mites, and I don't see shaking. And you'd see it more in the brood.
Yeah, it just looks like some neurologic problem that they, but they really look like they're cleaning with their legs all the time and shaking and yeah. But
Disastrous. Yikes.
Pat, I'm going to put a link in the chat just to the Beltsville lab.
okay.
You can look there. I don't know if you maybe want to email them or something and see if they'll accept a sample.
And they always have a process. If you want to do it, you have to follow their rules.
Yes. Yeah. There's a link there. It tells you how to collect them, but I just don't even know if they're taking samples anymore or not.
Yeah, I don't either.
Great.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Okay. So with that, I just want to remind everybody, I'm still feeding a few bees. I'm not feeding my regular colonies, but I'm feeding the swarms that I catch. So, don't forget to feed your bees. Sugar or sucrose, that's the best option. You don't want to feed honey. You don't want to spread any disease, possibly. There are lots of different feeders. Don't open feed. I have some of them.
I don't know if anybody can hear me, but I'm gonna cut out because I think I can all the time.
And I'm sorry, you were cutting out, so we wasn't able to hear who that was actually.
Getting
I think it's Marty.
different aid.
Okay.
Hey, Marty, can you type it
Anyway,
in the,
I'll
in the
talk
chat box?
to you guys.
Marty, can you type it in the chat box? Maybe gone. So Travis Morgan says he's got a top feeder on top of a deep of new frames with a new package of bees installed in it. His inner cover on top is some mold growing on the underside, on the side this week, just above the feeder. Should he be concerned, and is there anything he should do about it? I don't use top feeders. Anybody that uses
I don't
top
think you're
feeders?
supposed to be.
I don't know. I hear you once in a while. I didn't even know you were talking to me just now.
This Marty? Yeah.
I can raise hand, but I don't even know our chat box. I know I do somewhere, but I'm not sure where. Let's see. Raise hand. I don't know. Anyway, I'm gonna cut out, guys. Thank you. Anyway.
Thank you.
Travis, are you using a Miller feeder, top feeder? You're not supposed to use an inner cover with that.
They're talking about mold growing on, then you're saying Marty and whatever. So I don't understand. Bye.
Cheryl, yeah, it's one of the scholarship feeders. I'm not sure they have the plastic square.
Oh, with the it has the little chimney.
Yeah, I don't know if that's
yeah, don't use your inner cover with those.
Okay.
But you're going to get mold. You'll end up getting some mold on the underside of the lid. That's okay. It just kind of comes with the turf. With
yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
But
Thank
yeah,
you.
don't use your inner cover with them. Put it straight on your frames and just put the lid. But you'll get some mold. It's okay.
Okay. Thanks. That's great. Good to know.
Hey, Robert, you had a photo up of 4 different lids, caps with different size holes in them. Can you go over why?
And who's speaking?
Marcia Harmon.
Oh, Marcia, thank you. So yeah, so this just demonstrates if you're doing winter feeding, you want them to suck down the syrup, usually 2 to 1. You want a jar with lots of holes in it. If you're doing spring stimulatory feeding, you want the thin syrup, 1 to 1 ratio, or a little bit less is possible, but you don't want them to suck it all down at once. You want them to be stimulated by it. So just use a few jars in the hole, 3, 4, 5, so they can't take it all at once. And so that's why I use that picture.
Okay, so the 3,
winter, yeah.
The 3 is for the spring, the 5 might be for spring, and then the one with the whole bunch is for your fall.
Exactly.
Or a pack, or a package. Or
okay.
So here's a related question in our chat box from David, and he said, do I hear you say we should be able to stop feeding now? David, it's 100% situational. If you have an established hive that has good feed resources, then yeah, you can probably stop feeding now. We haven't fed a lot of established hives. They didn't need it. They had ample food this spring, and we didn't have the desire to split them. If you have a package or a very young colony with a lot of undrawn foundation, do not stop feeding now. You need to continue feeding them until you have both those deep boxes pretty well drawn out, because we're going to have days just like we did today where nobody will be able to fly, and they will go through whatever meager resources they have very, very quickly. And you could end up with a starved colony so fast. So it's very situational.
Perfect. Thank you for the clarification.
Very good.
Yeah, right now, just for example, I've been feeding the packages that I got, and I have 2 hives. they're about 5 feet apart. One of them will take in a quart of syrup about every 2 days, 2.5 days. The other one, it's about 4 to 5 days before they'll take. And they're, you know, they're in the same areas foraging and everything. It's just strange how some of them take it in and some of them take it in slower.
A lot of it depends on how much brood they're raising too.
Right.
Even though they're all having to put down wax because they're new packages.
Well, they did get some drawn comb in there with them when I started them. So they do have some drawn comb already in the hive.
Yeah, and that queen got in there and laid those up a lot quicker because you had given them drawn comb. And so they'll have, once that, after 3 days and that egg becomes larva, then they have to feed all those. I had a scholarship student who had a queen in his package of bees in addition to the queen that was in the cage. And I had given each of them a frame of empty drawn comb to start their packages on. And so before we released the queen, I looked with
you already had eggs.
And we had eggs. And I said, we haven't released this queen and we've got eggs. So, but the father was noticing how much faster that first week, the one colony that had the loose queen running around was going through syrup a lot faster than the other one. And I said, well, it's because that queen, from the minute we dumped that package in, started laying up those frames when the other one was still in a cage waiting to be released. And so they started needing more resources a lot quicker because they had, you know, stuff in larval stage already. So.
Yeah. Bob, you probably remember I called you earlier this spring about the queen in the cage and the queen I'd found 2 days later. Well, believe it or not, I think I may have 2 queens in that hive is what I think was going on. And I think one of them was in the like she just said, it was in the package. And if I'd have checked before I released the queen, I probably would have caught it.
Yeah, it happens once in a while. Great. Well, this photo is the Asian honeysuckle bush. And this just, I put this in to show you what's coming up soon. Usually it blooms a little earlier, but I see buds out there on the blossom, so it's coming up soon. It's an invasive species, but the bees do work it sometimes. We have black locust tree blossoming to look forward to. The trees are barely out. This picture is from a previous year. I sent a photo of the current situation to Cheryl the other day, and the leaves are hardly out at all. So
that's how they are. That's how they are over here.
Yeah.
The Asian honeysuckle is about ready to bloom, though. I mean, I was in Lenexa on Saturday. They're about ready to open.
Yes. Yeah, about ready, but cold day today.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
This is a close-up of the black locust tree blossoms. And then, of course, usually this month is when we have the yellow sweet clover. If you're fortunate to see it along the highways or wherever it's allowed to grow, because it grows taller than a few inches. So, but that's the yellow sweet clover. So this is the month of May. Welcome to May. And tulip tree blossoms. I have a couple of these in the property at the farm, but that's coming up also generally this month. And that's all I've got for this evening. I'm getting ready to start putting supers out. I kept meaning to do it yesterday, but got other stuff done. And I didn't make it to the farm today, but it's my plan for tomorrow to get out there and start getting everything going. So that's the presentation for today. It is about 10 after. And thanks everybody for joining.